Right. I want you to think about the last time you sent money to an international bank account. For me, it was 2 days ago. I was in Denia, Spain, and I was buying very tiny knitted cactus to bring home as presents from my cycling holiday. There were no payment machines, so there I was in 25-degree heat, typing this entrepreneur's IBAN number and SWIFT code into the banking app in my phone. I still felt surprised that it worked, but it made me feel very grateful that not only could I speak Spanish, but I could support an entrepreneur from Spain, and I got to skip the airport scramble for really boring presents on the way home. There is so much that's very exciting going on in payments, and I'll invite my panel to come up as I introduce them. There's a new shared language for payment systems. The name may not set the heart alight, ISO 20022, but it is exciting. It lets the world's different payment systems actually understand each other and carry proper information along the way. We've got stable coins, we've got central bank digital currencies, and whole national systems learning to speak to each other across borders. So we've got 4 people up on stage with me who pretty much between them see how money moves from every angle. We've got the head of international government relations at PayPal, Claire Alexandra. How are you?
Very well, thank you.
Good.
To be here.
Welcome. Chief Banking and Expansion Officer at Wise, Diana Avila. How are you?
Very good. Thank you so much.
Welcome. Chief Executive for the UK and Ireland and Global Head of Partnerships at Swift, Adam Bealey. Welcome.
Thank you very much indeed.
And we've got the Director of Revenue for EMEA at Airwallex, Laura Spencer. How are you?
Great. Thank you very much.
Lovely to see you all. So for an opening statement, I'd love you to look into the future, in fact, and tell us what the biggest change that you think we are going to see in cross-border payments is going to be in the next 5 years. Claire.
Thank you, Eddie. And let me start, and if I look at my sort of crystal ball, I'd say that I probably see more and more convergence between domestic transaction and cross-border transaction. I think I'm sure we'll touch upon that sort of, later on, but there's more and more sort of convergence between existing rails, instant payment, for example, new rails in the crypto space, which I think are going to help. And certainly new user experience, especially on wallets, which means that whether you're transacting domestically or cross-border, things feels much more the same for customers. And the one thing which I'd love to mention again, it was the previous panel, is I think fraud. We heard that 70% of the instances are overseas transaction, and we should keep that in mind in terms of how changes are happening to make sure that it doesn't contaminate the overall cross-border aspects.
And all those changes that you're predicting PayPal is going to be on.
Absolutely, and I think when I was talking about the user experience, I think this is exactly what we're trying to do to make sure that sort of users, can transact in the same way, whether they're doing this domestically or cross-border, so that the more you're finding it convenient, the more you're going to transact, and the experience will be good.
Okay, Deanna, what about you with your crystal ball?
Yeah, with my crystal ball, very similar. I believe in the next 5 years, and is already happening, we will see that cross-border payments are going to look more and more similar to domestic payments. There's not going to be a big difference for consumers, for businesses, initiating a payment domestically versus doing it for international purposes. There's going to be more and more way of interoperating different payment systems, different payment methods, and this is what consumers are aiming for. This idea of, I can make a payment locally and it's going to be instant, it's not going to cost me any money, but I'm going to send now internationally and I'm going to wait 5 days, I'm going to pay ridiculous amount of money, that's going to go away. And related to the cost, I also believe that in the next 5 years, the concept of transparency in FX, in international money movement, is going to be the default.
What do you mean by that, the transparency?
Yes, great question. So today, there's still a lot of confusion, and the pricing is obscure when it comes to cross-border payments, because it is not clearly disclosed what is the FX markup that different providers are going to be charging. But with the drive from the G20, from different regulators, not only part of the G20, But beyond this, new regulations are being introduced that are going to make transparency the main requirement for any provider, in order to disclose clearly to the customer what is a fee, but also what is an FX markup that is also adding to the fee of sending money and exchanging money internationally. And in 5 years, this lack of transparency is going to go away, because the regulation is catching up to require this from providers.
Okay. From a SWIFT perspective, in 5 years, what's going to be exciting for you, Adam?
I think for us, we kind of see two key themes. So the first is going to be, and touches on some of the comments a moment ago, is that the customer experience of cross-border payments will have evolved. Predictability, transparency, end-to-end tracking of them, and full value transfer will be the norm and ubiquitous. The second area is, I think, probably a likely conversion, and it's more on the digital side, but a likely convergence of AI and tokenization, where potentially we could see quantum-proof ledgers powering payments at scale, and doing that kind of with resilience and with reliability. That could be a likely
to combat some of the fraud that we heard on the previous panel.
Potentially to combat fraud. I think fraud is a kind of a whole ecosystem challenge to tackle, because fraudsters will always tackle the weakest link, and they can move from electronic payments back to checks, back to other forms of value transfer. So fraudsters are kind of a whole ecosystem.
Okay. Laura, but what about you? What if you're looking 5 years ahead, what are you going to be excited about then?
Yeah, well, at the risk of saying the same thing 4 times, I think we'll see what's moved from sort of a technological problem to more of an attitudinal shift. I hope that in 5 years' time we're able to not even use the term cross-border payments, and it just becomes payments, because we've removed that friction, that cost, that lack of transparency. And I think we already have the technology that we can use in order to do that. That said, we shouldn't be wildly optimistic. The latest with the G20 rule, we are behind on all of the criteria so far. So I think there's a lot of work to do to get to that point in 5 years. But certainly I do think that, you know, we're working hard at Airwallex to get there. And I think that certainly within all of our goals to get to that point where cross-border payments is just payments.
Okay. Adam, from where you sit at SWIFT, you see a big divide in this market. So you've got folks like on this panel who are building on new technology, and there's also institutions who are building on infrastructure that is frankly decades old. All of this is in the middle of this biggest upgrade in the industry. The industry has attempted that new shared language, the ISO 20022. Tell us how that's going and how the rest of the system is keeping up.
Thank you. So ISO 20022 has been and will continue to be a large program of activity across the industry. Big milestone achieved last year for end of coexistence, as it was known, for kind of cross-border payments over SWIFT. And as of today, we see that 97% of the payments over the SWIFT network are in ISO 20022 format. Still a little way to go, but there has been huge progress across the industry. Fair to say some of that is by institutions who are fully ISO native. Their technology is fully ISO native, and others that are using conversion services. But we're also seeing from an ISO perspective, it's not just SWIFT, other market infrastructures, domestic, regional ones around the globe are also moving in the same direction. I think, though, what is going to be key for the future is that when we're looking around future forms of value, future ways to move money, the foundational element of ISO 20022 is going to be key. And I'm not going to take credit for this statement, but it is time to hydrate the data lake. The fields are there, the format is there, the data now needs to be there to ensure that institutions can offer better solutions to their end customers. There is more information to help tackle fraud and fight financial crime. There are opportunities to be able to ensure that there are interlinking interoperability connections, because everybody's speaking the same language. But we do have to hydrate that data lake. The first big milestone for that is going to be this coming November, where, for example, unstructured address formats will no longer be permitted in many messages.
What does that mean?
That means that essentially the address will have to be either fully structured, or what's known as a hybrid format, in a way that enables that to be more easily read and understood across parties, but also it helps tackle financial crime because you can more clearly distinguish, say, Cuba Street from the country Cuba, as an example.
Okay. So Deanna, last week I was in Spain cycling, and I paid my guide, my Spanish cycling guide, in Alejandro in pounds, not euros, and that was through his Wise account. It was the first, Wise was of course the first non-bank to get direct access to the UK's faster payments system. I think that was about 8 years ago. But let's look at this from both sides. What does that mean for me, the person sending the money, and also from Alejandro's point of view? If he's getting pounds, does he get every single pence that I sent?
Yes, that's a great question because I say when we talk about payments and we talk about these G20 goals like direct access or transparency, it's very easy to get caught in the jargon of payments and forget, what does it really mean for the consumer, for the person initiating the payment. So you're right, in the UK, Wise was the first non-bank to become a direct participant of the payment system of FPS. And to put it in simple terms, what it means is we are able to remove intermediaries that we were using in order to make a transaction locally. Either, let's say in this example, you probably already have your money in the Wise account, as millions of customers are doing, but maybe you are funding this transfer from another bank account that you have in the UK. So instead of this transaction having to go through a third-party provider, this transaction is going from your bank directly to Wise. And the immediate effect that we saw 8 years ago when we reached this level of direct connection to the payment system was that the underlying cost of every transaction dropped by 9 times. And this means these are savings that we are then able to pass to customers, making it cheaper for an international money transfer because the domestic leg on one end, or sometimes in both ends as we achieve direct connection in more markets, is reducing the underlying cost, and we're able to price it lower for the customer. The second strong outcome of this for the consumer is speed. So with more and more instant payment systems becoming the rule in every jurisdiction, by being direct participants, it means we also get the payment message, or we are able to execute this payment message instantly. So concretely in the UK, we went from 20 minutes for clearing a transaction to under 20 seconds, which is how we define instant. And to give you an idea, today 75% of the cross-border payments that Wise processes are processed within under 20 seconds. And last but not least, this gets slightly more technical, but we see way less rejection, so we see more success rate of the payments on both ends. I'll give you another example. In Japan, last year, we became the first non-bank to connect directly to the payment system, to Sengin in November. And with the Japanese characters and language and making sure that we are able to verify the recipient information before we initiate the payment, we've seen that the success rate of a transaction has gone to 96%, where it used to be somewhere around 50% because of the errors, because now we have end-to-end control of the transaction by being direct participants of the system as opposed to doing it through a third party.
Interesting. So, Laura, Airwallex works with small, mid-sized businesses. You've got some great stories on your website about some of the companies that you're helping. And historically, they've got some of the worst deals on cross-border payments. So talk to us about a couple of things. So embedded finance, another bit of great jargon. But what does that mean, for example, for my friend who runs Persephone Books in Bath, but who has suppliers, in fact, from all over the world?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. So your book friend, so she's running a company, probably she has an app, and maybe that is provided by somebody like a Shopify.
Exactly.
And in that case, there's sort of 2 layers to embedded finance. So in the simplest case for your friend with the bookstore, Shopify is providing embedded financial services. So they're not just providing the website builder, the app builder. They're also providing your friend the financial services, the ability to take money in, the payments in, and the ability to pay money out to her suppliers. So that is Shopify providing those embedded financial services. I think the second layer is perhaps, to stick with the book analogy, say your friend decides to expand the book and the bookstore, and it becomes a very successful rare book marketplace, for example. That is a situation where she might find herself wanting to be able to offer those customers financial services, in which case she might want to offer them wallets, stored value accounts, and the ability for her to be moving or have some say in the money that comes in and the money that goes out. And that is where someone like Airwallex would be providing that type of B2B embedded finance, where we would be taking care of things like the KYC, the safeguarding, and yet she would be the one offering those financial services on her platform.
Interesting. So, and everyone in this industry says that local payments matter, local payments methods matter, and I wonder why. Why can't we just have one clever app that rules them all?
That's a great question. I'll take the first bit. Why do they matter first? So they matter for a number of reasons. The first is consumer preference and consumer trust. 99% of customers would prefer to be transacting in their local payment method. They have a much higher trust rate. And we see some of the travel companies that we work with, for example, they see really huge increases in their conversion rate of those customers when they move to these local payment methods. We have travel customers that have gone 20%, 30% higher conversion rate, and that really matters to some of these smaller businesses. The second reason is also speed. So if you think about credit cards, sometimes they're taking 1 to 3 days to settle. That's money that they can't use for working capital. Then there's authorization rates. So if you're trying to buy from companies and it's coming up as an international credit card, much higher fraud likelihood to be flagged as fraud. And so you're going to get those declines even though it might not be fraud. And then there's the cost element, which we've talked about on this panel already, but they're probably paying the interchanges and the FX fees as well. So with those local payment methods, you can go direct to the local rails, act like a local, do business like a local, and avoid a lot of those frictions.
Interesting. So, Claire, you've seen this from every angle. M-Pesa, the Gates Foundation, and now at PayPal, International Government Relations. I'd love to talk about stablecoins, central bank digital currencies. Every country seems to want its own. Is the future a dozen national systems that don't talk to each other, or something that's genuinely connected?
Surprise, surprise, I'm going to say maybe something in the middle. But I think you're right, there's lots happening, whether this is stablecoin on the private side, whether this is CBDC by public actors. Clearly, there's a lot. I don't think this is generally bad, because to me, I think it's a demonstration of this, let's say, innovative space. And when you think about innovation, I think it doesn't take a straight road. It can take, different meanders. And I think what we're seeing, and certainly this is what, we're doing at PayPal indeed with our own stablecoin, is we need to actually try it. We need to see how it works. We need to, test, the demand, sort of how our customers are reacting. So I think this fragmentation, which indeed exists, you're absolutely right, is not necessarily sort of a bad thing. I think it will evolve, but it very much, is a reflection of this innovative space. So this is, fantastic to see that we suddenly have, a means of payment which, would be available 24/7. This is real fast. This is not the only fast tool that we have on infrastructure, but it certainly helps. So I think this is very much sort of how I see it at the moment. Now, hopefully there will be some form of, convergence at some point. I think this is where regulation does play a role, and we've seen, MiCA on the European continent develop, then we've seen the Genius Act. We're already seeing MiCA being reviewed, right? So it's definitely an evolving, landscape. But I think there will be certainly, the need for several sort of, experiment and approach to take place, whether this is by, let's say a crypto native company that have their own stable coin, whether these are digital native company like ours who are also trying sort of something different, again, to provide choice to users and to provide many options for those transactions to take place.
Let's stick with you, Claire, for a moment. You know, you worked at the Gates Foundation, you're now at PayPal, both sometimes with the same aim of helping everyone, not just, you know, we had with Andrew Griffiths earlier talking about if the Conservatives were back, would be, you know, very good support for potentially the most wealthy in the world. But for those who are the poorest in the world, I wonder if this choice that you mentioned is helping them, helping the people that you used to work with at Gates, who also use, for example, PayPal, or does it make it harder for them?
So again, I'm going to stick with choice, and I'm going to say that I think this is a good thing. I don't think you want to necessarily sort of put a category of customers in a box, and you want to give them the option to choose. So again, along the innovation journeys and those that I've seen indeed sort of, you know, previously, you know, there's different elements that different categories of customers would want. Even actually the poorest don't necessarily look for a free service or a very cheap service if it doesn't meet their needs, right? And their needs will also be, for example, to have as little stress as possible. One of the things that I've learned from that time is that this would be the category of population that probably rely much more on payment than we do, because they need to really think about making this very scarce cash work really well for them. So removing the stress, making sure that the transaction has arrived is, for example, probably as important as cost. In terms of cost, we need to think not just about the absolute cost, but maybe that pay as you go is better than pay on a monthly basis, for example. Then, of course, you need to think about the environment. What type of devices would those customers have? Would it be a basic handset, as in the case of M-Pesa, as you referred to it, whether this is actually a smart device which could help you to, for example, have access to stablecoin, you know, if you're in a slightly different segment. So all of that plays a role. The one key different element for me in that landscape is really the role of cash, because if your money isn't born electronically and if you still rely on cash, you need a way to convert between the two. But again, I think there's providing choice to every category of individuals, even the poorest segment, is really important so that they make the decision as to what they want to use as opposed to others making it for them.
Interesting. So I'm going to get Adam to start on this question, but anybody else who wants to pile in afterwards, feel free. The UK had faster payments back in 2008, almost 20 years ago. Brazil now has PIX. India has UPI. The US, my home country, noticeably way behind on any of this. But Adam, you sit on the National Payments Vision Group. Is there a world in which the UK has to catch up rather than to lead? What has to happen in the next 2 years for that not to happen?
Thank you. So I think just a slight reframing. I don't think it's a question of is the UK playing catch up. I think this is now an opportunity for the UK to leap forward to reclaim that leading position in the new environment that we find ourselves in now. You know, tokenization, digitization, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it's a great opportunity that the UK really does need to grasp, and we've probably heard that on a number of panels today. I think what's different this time round is that back in February, the UK authorities, so the Treasury, Bank of England, PSR and FCA, published the Payments Forward Plan. And it's really comprehensive. It covers legislation, regulation, infrastructure, cards, open banking, digital wallets, et cetera, as well as some of the challenges around fraud. It is holistic. I think the challenge, though, to ensure that in 2 years' time it's successful is it needs to be delivered at pace. There need to be tangible proof points to show that progress is being made. So it's moving potentially from experimentation to MVP to real live trials as quickly as possible. And it's ensuring that that collaboration across the ecosystem continues. There is a potential risk that some of these new digital forms of value could create just faster silos, which may not bring the benefits if you're looking at interoperability, regional differences of stable coins versus tokenized deposits versus central bank digital currencies. there is a risk that poorer customer outcomes could be the result if collaboration and interoperability isn't factored into this. So really exciting time. We just need to move fast.
Okay, anyone else want to come in on that? Claire?
Maybe just to echo that I do think that is indeed exciting times, and there's definitely lots of potential for great things, including in the UK. I think we see a very vibrant ecosystem. So I would say that I think the range of players which are there, I think, show that. I think the one point that I would add in terms of the wallet side is to really reflect, as this trajectory I think is very positive, is the role of devices and how control over certain aspects of the device could also have an impact on the development of digital payment.
Okay.
I would also like to add, in my case, I sit at the Retail Payment Infrastructure Board, RPIB, we say, and this is evidence that the UK is leading in the right direction. The UK, the Bank of England, is driving these conversation with sufficient participation from the industry, and it's a very good mix, combination of the large banks and also payment companies, e-money companies, all of us designing how does the future of retail payment infrastructure should look like, with different priorities and aspects in mind, cross-border and the system being able to interoperate and also serve for cross-border payments as one of the core objectives. So this is evidence that yes, the UK was one of the first to introduce an instant payment rail back in 2008, and now, because others have come later, they might have easier ways for consumers to utilize the payment system, for instance, making payments at the point of merchant, as opposed to in the UK, where it's still very much only card. And then I believe we're heading in the right direction with this close participation from industry, from authorities, compared to other countries, let's say the US, where there's less coordination when it comes to the new infrastructure.
Okay. Laura, anything to add there?
No.
Okay, then I'll give you the last question to you then. When I send money abroad, or a friend sends money to home to support her family, she cares about low cost, speed, and does it arrive? So I'd love you to tell me a country that you think is doing the best in that, and one country you wish was further along.
So I think doing the best would have to be Brazil and the PIX system. I think the scale and the speed at which the adoption across 150 million people is impressive. I think you've actually touched on it already, but in terms of a country that could be further ahead, the world's biggest economy is still doing about 70% plus and batch ACH transactions in the US. And I think that there's a lot that can be done there.
Extraordinary. Right. Well, thank you very much to my panel. Let's give them a round of applause.